So in general, gender-based violence is violence against persons because of their gender. Both women and men experience gender-based violence, but the majority of victims are women and girls. So we see that gender-based violence and violence against women are terms that are often used interchangeably, as it's been widely acknowledged that most gender-based violence is inflicted on women and girls by men. So we should be careful to understand that it's not only against women, but it's commonly and widely acknowledged that it's against women by men. If we move to the second slide, what forms of gender-based violence are there? So one of the benchmarks for international legislation on tackling gender-based violence is the Istanbul Convention. It frames gender-based violence and violence against women as a gendered act, which is a violation of human rights and a form of discrimination against women. Under this convention, the gender-based violence are emphasized as resulting in physical, sexual, psychological, economic harm and suffering of women, including threats such as coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether it's occurring in public or private life. Some of these acts can be described in actions that we've seen generally, for example, female genital mutilation, the violence that we see, which are conducted by intimate partner, and this is in the form of intimate partner violence. And increasingly, more recently, actually, there has been the cyber violence against women. So with the increasing reach of the internet, the rapid spread of mobile information, and the widespread use of social media has led to the emergence of cyber violence against women and girls as a growing global phenomenon, which is potentially which has potential significant economic and societal consequences. So for example, the World Health Organization shows that 1 in every 3 women will have experienced this form of violence in their lifetime. However, the most common and even direct form of gender-based violence and violence against women is explored through a random effect meta-analysis, which was conducted by the UN this year. And the pool of prevalence is on the intimate partner violence, where among women it has occurred 44% in 2020 against the prevalence in 2019, which is 35%. So it has risen up by at least almost 10%, or just under 10%. Non-violent intimate partner, non-intimate partner violence rather, is only at 14%. So that means there's a prevalence of you being a woman being abused by an intimate partner at 44% than a non-intimate partner, which is at 14%. The highest prevalence rates of intimate partner that have been reported include emotional at about 30%, physical also about 30%, sexual about 18%. So sub-regional analysis in Africa has found that in the Western African region, it's around 30%. In the Eastern is around 25%. And in the Southern, where South Africa is one of the leading countries, is at between 40 and 45%. So that takes us to the next slide on gender based violence in Africa. So according to the UNFPA, the East and Southern region has the highest rates of sexual violence against women and girls. This now specifically just indicates that sexual violence is one of the highest within East and Southern Africa. So sexual violence against adults who are, or rather people who are between 15 and 24 years old is highest in normal countries, peaceful countries, but sexual violence against early adolescents who are below 15 years increases in countries which have conflict, which includes DRC, Mozambique, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, among other countries. So you have higher chances of sexual violence on younger people in countries that face violence and conflict rather. And this one we see that the UN has also indicated that sexual violence is used as a weapon. For example, in my work in South Sudan, we find that one community or one tribe or ethnic group will come and attack the women of this certain village and conduct some sexual harassment in those villages to intimidate them as a form of weapon. The high rate of violence against women and girls in region is maintained by the prevalence of harmful gender norms, which I think we can come up with a billion of them, but some of them include the use of alcohol, the common conversation of women are only sexual objects, and a lot of this conversation that goes on. Gender-based violence then needs to be addressed, especially in emergency situations. However, countries in crisis and transition have very limited capacity, and that's our problem in coming to meet this gender-based violence to try and eliminate. Most countries in Africa do not reflect their commitment as expressed in numerous international conventions and treaties that they are part to. And this is something that we should call our governments out on. And some of the humanitarian crises are actually because of the governments and parties do not reflect these commitments. On the next slide, you will see that gender-based violence is more than you think, and it's more than in Africa. It's very common even in European spaces. And from our diagram, you can see that 1 in every 3 women have faced physical or sexual violence in Europe, or 1 in every 2 have faced at least sexual harassment. 1 in 20 have been raped. This is a number which is very low compared to especially South Africa, but it's still very prevalent in European spaces. And you can just see that at least there's been a lot of sexual-based, gender-based violence and violence against women all over the world. So this is a very interesting conversation that you're having. I just want to point us to a movie that I watched that's because my background is on conflict and peace. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there's a movie which is called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. And here you can see both gender-based violence and the role of women in conflict and gender-based violence that the women in Africa have actually played. So I hope I've answered your question, and I'll be open to any further questions that would be asked. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing that with us. As you know, when it comes to gender-based violence, there are a myriad of short-term and long-term effects. And so Dr. Beatrice Akala from the University of Witwatersrand will be enlightening us further on this issue. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Akala. I think that you might be on mute, Dr. Akala. Yes, we can hear.
Thank you very much. Can you hear now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Liaga, Emma, for that comprehensive introduction. And you have touched on very important issues that are also I'm passionate about, very close to my heart. And just saying to us that when we talk about gender-based violence, we also need to think of the men, and the boys in our community. So as much as we talk about the women, violence against women and girls, we should also be awake to the idea that we also have gender-based violence also being experienced by men and women in our communities. So thank you so much for making that clearer, and also, sharing with us, research and reports that highlight that this issue is not just an African issue, East African issue, or South African issue, but it cuts across races, it cuts across, age groups, and even continents. So that is a very important point to be making, because then it makes us think broadly. We know when we come up with the interventions, there should be interventions that are looking, although we look at context specific, but also just to look at what is happening elsewhere. So I have two questions that were posed to me by the team. And the first question is, what are some of the critical psychological effects of violence on one's identity and the ability to optimally contribute to society? And the second question is about what role does education play in combating violence? And that is educating both adults and children on what violence against children is and what the implications for both the child and the adult are. Then can it be incorporated into the education system at an early phase? And what would the implications be? So those are quite big topics, but I would talk about some of the issues that have been highlighted here. May not be exhaustive, and that is why we then have to continue with the conversations outside this scheduled meeting. Again, so I don't have slides like Dr. Liaga. I'll just talk over the issues. So the issue of psychological impacts or effects of violence is a very traumatic issue and experience for people who have been violated. So would be both men and women, would be boys and girls, or whoever has been, has experienced some form of violence. And when you think about psychological, the issues of trauma that we think about, somebody is very traumatized as a result of the violence that they experienced. Could be physical violence, and could be sexual violence, could be abuse. Just the way Dr. Liaga, summarized. So trauma is an issue that survivors have to contend with, and it has no timelines. You can't say, for you to be able to get over what you experienced would give you a month, would give you a week, would give you a year. So it's a long process that takes a lot of interventions in order for somebody to come to terms with what happened to them. So trauma is one of those. We have issues of mental health that you can think about: depression, think about anxieties. Somebody who has been violated can suffer serious mental illnesses. They can be very anxious when they get into a room. When they confront the people who violated them, they become very anxious. Issues of depression, and I'm sure you have come across cases where people become suicidal. When you lose hope, when you lose, the will to live, because what happened to you cannot be comprehended, in totality. So people become suicidal, and sadly, some of them actually end up taking their own lives because they cannot cope with what happened to them. And this calls for us, the cycle, the people around, people who have been violated, to be very, very alert to what is happening around, so that we don't end up losing a life we can offer support, we can, offer hope and just encouragement. So, those are extreme cases. You have cases of withdrawal, you have cases of insomnia, you have, people losing self-esteem and losing that self-worth because you blame yourself for what happened. In most cases, the victim feels I did something wrong, and that is why I was violated. That is why I was abused. So when that continues for a long time, then you find that it is very hard for them to cope. It's very hard for them. Their self-esteem is quite low. And that would mean that because we are looking at how this then translates into the place of work, we are saying that they won't even be able to operate at an optimal level because your self-esteem is low, your self-worth is low, you are blaming yourself. It is very hard for such a person to get out of bed and go to work and go to school because they have this huge cloud that is hanging over their heads, and they just feel that I have no way out of this situation. So the effects are quite a lot, and it's just bringing somebody or pulling somebody down because of what they did. We've had cases that have been highlighted in the media, in South Africa, and you see that the effects do not just settle with the person who has been abused, but you have families, you have friends who also get affected as a result of what their family member went through or their child went through, and they take on that weight. And remember when we had the student at University of Cape Town, Uyi, when Uyi was murdered, and when I was watching the funeral service, her brother was blaming himself. Where was I to assist my sister? If only I was there, she would not have been violated, she would not have been killed. So I'm saying the impacts do not just rest with the person who has been violated, but it also affects the people around them. Those would be your friends, who would blame themselves for not being there, for not doing enough. Your family members will take on that blame, and so the psychological impact is quite huge to a community. What did we do right? Why did this have to happen under our watch? So it's quite a myriad of effects that we can think about psychologically, and that is why I think it was also important to look at the numbers that Dr. Liaga put on the slide, to be able to say, yes, this is a problem, but there is help. So these are the interventions, these are the phone numbers. Can you call somebody so that they can be able, to help you? I know you as a friend would like to intervene, but if you don't have the right tools, it becomes even more complicated. You need to direct them to professionals who will be able to deal with the psychological impacts of what they have gone through. So it's not an issue that we take lightly. It's quite heavy on the person who has been violated or the person who has experienced violence. I don't know how much time I have, Barbara. I can go on and on. So just let me know if that is, we can work with those for now and move to the next question, depending on the time that I have.
Yes, Dr. Akala, I think we can move on to the second question that we had. Kayla?
That we had. Okay, so thank you for that direction. So again, looking at violence in schools, and we are asking what role does education play in combating violence? Education plays a very key role in combating violence. And education doesn't have to be on the school ground, in the school, in the classrooms. Education has no boundaries. So in as much as we are saying our children spend a lot of time, 3/4 of their day in school, and that is why education should be, but I am arguing that education should be, all round, education in homes, education in community halls, education in our religious centers, so that, we are educating everybody and moving everybody on this issue. But again, coming to school, that is in a formalized way, where we talk to, our children, to the school community, and we are speaking in one voice and we are sharing information. So it is very important. And the starting point, and I think also Dr. Liaga touched on it, the issue of human rights, the importance of observing, our rights, the rights of children, the rights of everybody who is in our community is very important. So you have to open up that conversation with children, and you have to open up that conversation with adults. So we've also, come across violence that is between children violating other children, which is quite sad. We've heard of cases of death, we've had cases of sexual violence, and that is why, and your question that at such an early age we should start that conversation to be able to say, this is my body, and you don't touch here, and you don't do this to me, that is wrong. So it is very important, because we've seen abuse has no age, has no limits, and has no gender. So we have to talk to our children in a very formal way, in the schools and in the classrooms. The issue of bullying, I think is quite huge. So kids are bullying one another on the playgrounds. And that is why it is also important to bring in these conversations. And as we talk about the impact of violence that I talked about in the first segment, so you'll see again kids who are violated, their performance would not be very good. They will also withdraw. They will not participate. They will not be quite social with other children. So it is very important that we have that conversation with them. And just, when we think about Ubuntu, that connectedness, I am because we are, and we are the village. We talk about, it takes a village to bring up a child, the African, metaphor. So as, a village, school village, taking care of the children, you have the home village and you have the whole community. So when we have this education, that's why I'm saying school is very important for us to have that conversation, but the conversation should permeate to other areas of society. And that is why I'm saying it is very important. Education is very important, and the school is very important. And starting very early is very important, because when you say to your child, you say to the little girls and the little boys, don't do that. That is not okay. Do not, beat up your little sister. You're already planting a seed. When you say, do not touch this part of my body, and the kid will always quote you and say, my mom has said this is wrong for you to touch my private parts, because you have told them, this is my body, this is sacred, and you don't, touch me in such a way. And if you do so, what do? I'll go and report to the teacher. I'll go and tell my mommy. And we have seen, sadly, I think it could be last week, or this week, where we have this two-year child who was raped in the home. The mother's boyfriend, and the child died. So there was a court case, and somebody has been handed a sentence for doing that. So we are saying that's why the conversation is not just school, it's also at home. And the child should be very comfortable to say to your mommy, this person who came to our home, or this person who is living with us has done this and that to me, so that we are able to form this ring, this village around our children, so that, when something happens, we are able to pick it up as quickly as possible, And just looking at, some of the signs when the child is withdrawn, when the child who used to be very talkative is not talking anymore, when they're not feeding or their sleep patterns have changed, then the people around the child should be able to pick up something is wrong and see how they can be able to, assist that child, in a very, in a very timely way. So yes, education is important, but I'm saying let's, apart from school, let's also move in other spaces where these children are, and the people in those spaces need to be educated. So yes, we need to do that. We need to provide information where these children can find help in case they feel, in case somebody has violated them or somebody has abused them. So I don't know whether I should continue, Barbara. I can talk until tomorrow. I'm a teacher, and teachers talk all the time. So let me know if I can continue. Mm.
Yes, you still have just a few more minutes, just 5 more minutes.
Thank you. So again, a few minutes. Can it be in education? Can it be incorporated in education? And I think it's already happening.
Oh, sorry, Dr. A bit of
Yeah, there's an echo, yes.
Okay, yeah, I think it's fine now.
Okay, yes, it can be, and I see in some schools, in learning areas such as life orientation, some curricula would be talking about sex and sexuality. Yeah, so you get this information being included in the learning areas that we have in different education systems and different countries. So yes, it can be incorporated, but maybe again, what I find to be a little bit restricting is, taboo and tackling some of those topics where you find that not so much information is given. So we need those in the education sector. Maybe would need to prepare the educators, the teachers who are teaching such, sensitive issues, to be prepared adequately, to be given the necessary support so that they can give the young people the necessary information that they require. So, and I think it's quite important. And it's not just in schools. The other area that is a bit gray would be in the issue of reporting and our police stations. We need a little bit of sensitivity there because when somebody goes to report a violation, how are they handled? I see there's now a gender desk in police stations, and our police people being sensitized about the issue. So we should make that space also friendly so that a victim, when they walk into those spaces, they should actually get the necessary support that they need in a space that is not judging them, in a space that is not violating them. So that would be a secondary kind of violation. So that education, you can see how far it needs to go. So move into spaces that can make, reporting, quite friendly, and even counseling to happen in those spaces. So yes, it's happening, and the wheels are quite slow, but we are hoping that with time, we should be able to get to a space where, although we're not saying that we need to have more violations or things like that, but if one person, the statistics are quite, quite tormenting, as Dr. Liaga presented. But when somebody, gets into such a space, they should be able to get the support that they need, so that we can lessen on the psychological support, the psychological impacts that I talked about in the beginning.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Akala. I think we definitely agree with you on that part. Kayla.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akala, for your insights. I particularly liked how you mentioned like mental health, because I think a lot of people forget about the repercussions of gender-based violence and also how it affects like families beyond just the victim, also victim blaming, and I think just teaching children boundaries from a young age. Like, yeah, I think that there's a misconception that we shouldn't, like children shouldn't know certain things, but I think children know a lot more than we think they do. So I think it's very important. And just education overall, in order to combat gender-based violence. So thank you so much for your insights. I really enjoyed listening to you. And yeah.
So
Thank you.
So as we know, this year, the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence is focused on eliminating this, and the way that the fundamental aspect of it is amplifying the voices of women workers in the informal economy. And so joining us on this topic, we will be having Mrs. Loice Alusala.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Sorry. Happen to be the same house. So we have to manage the echo sound and get someone in a different space. So, all right, this is what we get with working from home and working in the same space. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be part and parcel of this panel. So I'll briefly talk about gender-based violence and the focus on the informal sector and how we can prevent that. So this is part and parcel of the ILO Convention. And basically the convention applies to violence and harassment in the world of work occurring in the course of work, or arising out of your workspace. So that's what the focus here. So as we know that globally, really, we've got quite a huge burden in terms of the informal economy and the informal workers. And people within the sector are usually not included within legislation. So they tend to fall outside the cover of what exactly and the legislation. So we find that they are not represented when it comes to their rights, and they're the ones that are mostly violated in this issue. So when we talk about gender-based violence, really what are we looking for, and how does it affect us? Really, it's quite sad that a lot of this really focuses on women who will be most impacted by gender-based violence, because globally we find that, for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, just more than 90% of the people who are in the informal sector are women. And so when we talk about gender-based violence, although it covers both male and females, we find that women tend to be mostly vulnerable in that category. And this is because most of them are found in vulnerable situations, for instances, in domestic work, home-based work, and then they do contribute more towards the family work in comparison to their male counterparts. So when we focus on the informal economy and how gender-based violence occurs in this section, we need to remember that, unfortunately, in our circumstances, in our regions, we've got women mostly being impacted. So I'll quickly dash through what that looks like and who are the perpetrators of this. So just giving you a brief synopsis. State being one of the biggest violators when it comes to this for women. And by that, I mean, we've got government officials who happen to be state officers, especially the police, municipal workers. So you'll find the informal traders mostly when they're out carrying out their trade, they will be harassed. You'll find that they are evicted by municipal workers. They have to pay those licenses, and sometimes really it's meager resources. And in that way, you find that the state organs also happen to be violators. So you'll check issues of immigration status. They're excluded from legal provisions due to their legal status, so they cannot get services. And when you go out in the street, you'll see that they're being beaten, the verbal abuse, evictions as well, and the fact that they can't report this crime, sometimes they can't get the assistance they required. So those are some of the violations that we do. I like right at the beginning for us in South Africa, we had a very good insight on ENCA. I think we had Dr. Mary Mwaka, who shared the issue of gender-based violence. How can we support that? And how can we be, she talks about being a bystander when it comes to gender-based violence. Who is a bystander? Are you a bystander? Are you letting this work out? Are you supporting the system? So wherever we find ourselves, we should be really looking towards ensuring that gender-based violence doesn't happen while we watch, at our watch. So you, whoever you are, wherever you are, you can impact on that. So wherever you are, whether you're a state official, whether you are a normal public citizen, a normal citizen, you can avoid verbally abusing the street vendors, you can, or the other members within the informal sector. Because when you look at the trajectory, we've got the triangle in terms of the workers. You'll find that people in the formal economy are really at the apex of that. They are very well protected, they have unions, but informal members are not. So within our workspaces, what does that look like? Within our homes, you'll find that not just the vendors, I've mentioned the street vendors, but we also have the domestic workers who are also sometimes abused by household members. And this can be violations in terms of abuse, harassment. Sometimes you hear them being beaten. It's criminal acts of rape, sometimes access to resources. You've heard of the cases where we have individuals struggling, especially within our we call them like the domestic workers really get challenges when it gets to working and getting support. So sometimes they're not paid. Are you part of the story? Are you perpetuating domestic violence in your space? Are you supporting it or not? So issues like rape, murder, harassment, being forced to work extreme long hours without compensation, that's really like how informal workers are violated. Going on, I think we'll go to some of the emotional abuse that Dr. Akala talked about. I think that is overall, like everyone who's abused tends to also have some issues and impact on mental abuse that they've suffered. And then the deprivation and mobility and access to basic needs is also big. But when you go out in areas where they also carry their trade, there's also other forms of abuse that happen. And so this can also happen between the workers themselves. So you'll find issues of theft also occur between each other. There's domestic violence, which is perpetrated through intimate partner violence as well. So those are just some of the examples of what is happening. And the fact that they are not supported, usually covered through legislation, it's really important for us to support and ensure that our countries are ratifying the ILO Convention so that we can ensure that all workers and all individuals are covered through the human rights framework and that we can get recourse for that and justice for them. So just make sure that you are not a bystander when violence happens against informal workers. I think we will have another panel member that will be exploring this a little bit later. So I'll send it back to you, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Alusala, for just enlightening us on why the challenges in the informal sector are already so many, but specifically when it comes to women, we do face more of a challenge than anybody else. So we shall move on now to our next panelist for this afternoon.
Okay, so our next panelist is Jane Onoka. She has worked in international development for a long time and is in an agribusiness supply chains and gender advisor at the International Finance Corporation in the private sector arm of the World Bank. Good afternoon, Mrs. Onoka. Is she here? I don't know.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Kayla and Loice and your team for putting this together. It's really an honor to be able to come and talk to you guys. And I was just thinking as I was preparing for this, it's time for us to, hand over the baton. So I'm really excited to be here and to be handing over the baton to you girls. Well done. So I was asked to speak about unpaid care work. And I just had like about 30 minutes to prepare. So I don't have slides and I hope my thoughts are not all over the place, but I'll just share what my understanding is. So I have two questions. So what is unpaid care work? And so basically just to explain a little bit more what that is about. And then the second question is about whose responsibility is it to address this? And how do we begin to combat this from a government workplace policy standpoint? So just to start, the concept of unpaid care work, it comes from the socially ascribed roles to men and women in reproduction, production, and community engagement. So while the society has those roles to be fulfilled, you find that women are mostly expected to play the reproduction, production, and community engagement roles. And this is what we call the triple burden of women in society. While you will find men are mostly engaged in the production roles. And the reproduction roles are the roles around nurturing children, caring for the home, providing food, cleaning. Production roles are basically the economic activities that lead to an income. And the community engagement roles around caring for other members of the society, like elderly children, engaging in religious activities, in women group activities. You find that overall, women do all the three roles, but men will only engage in the productive roles. And so the time that women put in all these roles is not accounted for, is not recognized, and it's not paid for. So what we're saying is that unpaid care work is more than childcare. A lot of times people, when you talk about unpaid care work, people's minds will run to childcare, but it's more than childcare. And unpaid care work is not all about financial reward for doing these roles. It's about recognizing that the role that women play, appreciating it, and also allowing women to participate in economic activities as well as to enjoy their human and labor rights. And it's also about ensuring that all the reproductive and community engagement activities that are borne by women are not a burden for women. After all, when women thrive, the whole society thrives. So what is the status of childcare in the informal sector? So many women in the informal sector, you will find that they're responsible for all those that work that needs to be done in the home, from the cooking, the cleaning, caring for the children, the elderly, and as well as you know, that doesn't bring in an income. So they still have to go out there and bring in an income. So looking at various national time use surveys, it shows that women in the informal sector, they work, you know, they have much less time to spend on paid work than women in wealthy homes. Because women in more wealthy homes, and sometimes they will be involved in formal engagement, would be able to pay somebody to take care of their, you know, care work, and therefore would have more time for paid work. So this undermines the women's, in the informal sector, their equal right to decent work, social security, and a good standard of living. So I was looking at a policy brief done for the UN Secretary General on the panel on women's economic empowerment. And on the brief, they had said that across 66 countries, which represents about 2/3 of the world, 66 countries, about 2/3 of the world population, women spend more than 3 times as much time as men on unpaid care work and domestic work. And I'm just going to give you an example. As Kayla mentioned, I work in agribusiness supply chains. And part of my work is to help projects identify gender gaps that then we try to close during the life of the project. But before we identify these gender gaps, we do a gender analysis. And as part of the gender analysis, we do something we call a 24-hour time series. So we ask men and women in a particular value chain to tell us in a day how they spend their day, from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed. And you'll find that women's hours are accounted for, almost all the 24 hours. They'll probably have just 4 hours of sleep. They're going to sleep at midnight and they're waking up at 4, and the rest of the day is accounted for. But when you look at the time series that is put forward by men, you find that they actually have some time for leisure activities, and sometimes that they don't even know what to put there, because once they've done their productive activities, they've gone to the farm in the morning, they've worked, their day is basically done. So generally we see that care work is undervalued. Is undervalued and also underpaid. In low-income households where parents don't have resources to provide childcare, children suffer, and in such circumstances, you end up seeing the girl child being responsible, or even the elderly parents being then responsible for taking care of the home. In sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as South Asia, we see that informal employment is a greater source of non-agricultural employment for women. And informal employment includes, you know, people that do all sorts of works, from the what we call in Kenya mamambogas, to hawkers, to roadside vendors, to people working in wage employment. So the ILO estimates that informal employment represents more than 46% of the global employment. And around the world, 40% of women in informal employment, which is also known as wage employment, they do not receive social protection through their work. And these figures are rising. One other challenge we see for women in the informal sector is the irregularity of their working hours. So sometimes they do the jobs that they can find. So sometimes they have to wake up at 4 a.m. Sometimes they have to wake up really late. Sometimes their work is during the day. So we find that the irregular working hours, they make it impossible for them to be able to do their other domestic care work. But we see that investing in quality childcare, which is a key, I think, which bears the biggest, takes the biggest percentage of unpaid care work. If investing in childcare can have a triple dividend for society, and by triple dividend I mean that the family will benefit, the men will benefit, and society at large would benefit. For the government, if women are allowed to spend less time on unpaid care work and engage more in productive activities, that would directly mean that there are more taxes to be earned for the women. So there's a business case for government, for employers, for everybody to invest in helping women to address unpaid care work. There's an organization I work for, IFC, has published a report called Tackling Child Care. I think you can Google it, and it gives a lot of examples of how employers can help address childcare in the workplace. For purposes of today's discussion, I won't engage more. I'll focus more. I'm focusing more on the informal sector. So if you want to learn more about the formal sector, please Google that report. So how can this be addressed? And this is in response to the last question: is whose responsibility it is. So the responsibility for addressing unpaid care work is not only for the government. The government has a role, but we as individuals, everybody has a role to play. So if you look at examples of how this has been done in the informal sector. So as I said, the government has a role, and the role of the government is at 3 levels. The government has a responsibility to create laws and regulations that mandate employers to provide for childcare services as a human right. And there are examples of where governments have been able to do that. The national childcare policy environment is different in every country though. So while governments have policies in place that are specific to employer-supported childcare, offering childcare is mandatory for certain businesses in 26 out of 189 economies that have been studied in the World Bank Women Business and Law report. So the first step to ensuring that childcare options are available is to identify the related legal requirements and then ensuring that governments put this in place. So in Uruguay, for example, we see that their law promotes universal childcare services. So that means all employers, whether in the informal sector or in the formal sector, are mandated to provide childcare services. We also see, there are lots of examples from the Latin America and Caribbean world. So countries such as Chile, Ecuador have policies in place that give some form of support to provision of childcare, which is the biggest percentage of unpaid care work. Even countries such as Turkey have laws in place. And in the Western world, they do provision for that. So the government can really put laws and regulations in place that employers, when employers apply this, can help women in addressing the unpaid care work burden. So the government in itself can also provide childcare facilities. So just the same way that they are government kindergartens, the governments could also provide government daycare centers where people can take children and then go to work. They can also provide care homes for the elderly. So it shouldn't just be the Catholic Church that's looking into providing care for the elderly. The government or NGOs, the government can also take up that responsibilities. But we all know how most of our governments are, especially in Africa, their priorities lie elsewhere. So I like to see that the responsibility as not just being for the government, but for being for everyone, including for the people affected, who are the women, who are the informal workers. So there are examples of where women have come together and organized for themselves. So in India, for example, we see an association that's called SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association. So they've set up, so it's sort of an organization that is sort of a cooperative movement where women in different sectors have come together, pooling resources, but they've also set up childcare cooperatives. So they care, in this childcare cooperatives, they take care of members' children, and this allows them to have time to participate in productive activities. We also see a similar example in Brazil, where some women working in, it's called Belo, or is, anyway, in a municipal council collecting waste. So they are waste pickers, and they collect this waste in the evenings, time when children cannot be left on their own. So they've partnered with the municipal council, and they've set up childcare centers. So by themselves, they've set this up. They contribute and they fund this, and they are able to to engage in work while it enables them to engage in work. So I'm an advocate of not looking beyond government, because sometimes governments are slow. So I'm an advocate of trying to see what's within ourselves, what's within our means to do. And in Africa, particularly in countries such as Kenya, women coming together to form organizations, to form chamas is so big. And I believe that these chamas can also look into how can they help themselves to address the issue of childcare. Now, one last issue I'm going to talk about, Mrs. Alusala talked about domestic workers. So this is an area that also, it's an element of the unpaid care work. A lot of us have, and a lot of people in formal employment or a little bit wealthier households, they have domestic workers. But this, a lot of times they're underpaid, they have no social security. And this just comes from the notion that care work is domestic work, is of low value, doesn't require, a lot of investment in it. But this is wrong. So this is an area where also governments need to put in place laws and regulations that protect domestic workers' pay, social security, working conditions. And then again, just as individuals, we need to value this work, because by having that domestic worker, it allows you to contribute at your place of work. It allows you to be more productive. You're less absent, you're less distracted. Employers benefit from that. So we just need to value these domestic workers and pay them really a decent salary. I've also seen examples of where domestic workers have come up with cooperatives or associations to advocate for their case. So on the government side, I think it would be good if governments can have a policy environment that encourages association and gives protection for when domestic workers form these associations, unions, to promote their work. So I think I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Onoka. I think that has been extremely insightful, and where we can kind of pin something to like the hidden aspect as to why women are not being considered as necessarily equals in the workspace, and seeing how this impacts both the formal and informal sector, and more the informal sector, because the informal sector, as you mentioned, the women don't have necessarily social security. A lot of governments don't have legislations in place to support them. And I think that also it's interesting to see how it's not just the responsibility of the government, because essentially the value attached to unpaid care work it exists within everyone. Like every single person has kind of taken it for granted as the role of women in society, and so it becomes undervalued. And so the responsibility doesn't just fall on the government, but also it is our responsibility as individuals to reevaluate the value that we place, and as a community, help each other, help our women who the responsibility of unpaid care work falls on more, and to kind of dissipate and spread the equality, the balance between the amount of work that women have to do in the unpaid sector. Because as we know, the more hours we put into unpaid work, the fewer hours we can put into the economic aspect and side of our endeavors. So thank you very much, Mrs. Onoka, for enlightening us on the issue of unpaid care work.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To me. I think we can all agree that 2020 has been a year where social media has really kept us together or kept us united. So I'd just like to introduce Imaan Moosa, the co-founder of To Empower Her, a community platform aimed at promoting the rise of women across South Africa through social engagement. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Should I put on my camera?
Yes, please, if possible.
Okay. It says I'm unable to start it because the host has stopped it.
Oh, okay, sorry. There you go. Sorry.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having myself and Yumna on. She's unable to make it, so I will be representing the two of us.
Thank you.
You asked me how important and impactful conversation is and what does it mean to be able to give a voice to women. So I think it goes without saying that social media can be both a tool for good and one for evil, depending on the way in which it is used. And Yumna and I were very aware of the benefits of social media, especially as an important tool of social and political activism, which I think we saw during the hashtag Fees Must Fall movement and the Am I Next movement. Fees Must Fall really propelled the movement, which was, I think, major news publications, they weren't representing the protests in an accurate manner. It was very much from a one-sided view of what the government and the university was thinking. And so social media created an inclusive and safe space where the oppressed and the marginalized and the displaced were able to have their voices heard. And it nurtured students' voices. And it was needed because I think that was how change was able to occur. So we created To Empower Her to give a space for such candid and meaningful conversations to be had. We believe that conversation is needed, especially in an era where everyone who has access to the internet is fighting for their voice to be heard. And many times it is those without power or influence whose stories must be heard that are not being heard. They're being bullied into silence by those who have much more power and who are able to have their voices heard. So we want to amplify these women's voices. By sharing each other's stories, we know that we can and will enable change. History has been shaped by storytelling, and without sharing the stories of our downfalls as a society and the injustices that have happened, we might not be able to hold those responsible to account, to correct the wrongs of the past, and to fight for the rights of women. So being able to give women a platform is being able to educate and empower. Storytelling is a form of education, and we are able to learn from one another when we're able to hear each other's stories. We are able to promote the stories of our sisters and pass them down so that we may provide help when it is needed. With creating this platform, we have been so fortunate to interview and share the stories of various women across the country and abroad. We've interviewed women in the United States. We've spoken to people in London and Zimbabwe, and it has been such an inspiring and insightful experience. We've learned so much from them. And it was through learning their stories and being able to share those women's stories that if they needed help, if they were in situations or in relationships where they could not ask for help from outsiders or were too fearful, we were able to create a community that would ensure that their safety was of top priority. And it was doing something like this that we realized the importance of being able to share women's stories. And when we live in a society where women's stories have long since been silenced by men, men ensure that the status quo is always maintained. Men have helped their male counterparts keep the voices of women hushed. That is why men are able to get away with raping, pillaging, and murdering women. Because if they know that they can silence us and silence our voices, they know that no one will speak up. They know that they can continue doing what they're doing. And so we as women, we need to be able to support each other, to be able to have our voices heard so that we can change things. Because when people are hearing our stories and people are speaking up, that's when people will also start listening, and they won't just be able to ignore one or two voices. Because as a collective, you can't shut down all of our voices when they're loud and when we're fighting to be heard. Governments are run by men who dominate their women counterparts. In the workplace, unpaid maternity leave, gender pay gaps, and lack of women in positions of leadership allow gender disparities to continue to exist in those very same places. Government is not just our government, but governments across the world. It is easy to not give women their rights, to not let them have access to what is needed, to be able to raise the prices of sanitary pads or products that are necessary for them, because there are no women sitting on that council being able to forward the needs that women must get. And if they are, it's men who dominate that space. So how can we expect change to happen? And because of this, because men are aiding the fight against women, we need to aid each other to be able to have our stories heard. When we are able to collaborate and mobilize and nurture each other, as men say, we are so good at caring for each other like men do. Men care about other men, whether they're related to them or not. They care about them because they know that they need to preserve the status quo. They need to preserve the power that they already have. Without it, they won't be able to continue doing what they're doing. And just like men preserve and protect their male counterparts, we must also preserve and protect our women counterparts. If we can do that, and we can tell each other stories and make sure that our voices are being heard, we can and we will be able to affect change. And so that's what Yumna and I with Chimpower Her, we aim to do. And I think this is why we are so thankful to be included in conversations like these, where women are being able to create a space for each other, to be able to have our stories heard. And we really hope that we can continue such conversations, because when more people get involved, when more women are included in these conversations, and even men, because men need to be hearing these conversations, they need to be a part of these, we think that we will be able to bring about change, and we hope that we can take this movement forward.
Thank you so much, Imaan, for speaking. It was really insightful and very inspiring to me, and I'm a big fan of your page, so just hearing like your inspiration behind it is really, really inspiring. And I love like the community that you've created. I've actually spoken to a few people through your page, so I really, really appreciate it. And just thank you so much for everything that you've done and using like social media for good. And yeah, I really hope that your page continues to grow and your community continues to grow. And just thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. It's honestly such an incredible experience. We're so humbled and honored to be here. Thank you.
So thank you, as Kayla said, thank you, Imaan, for joining us. And that brings us to the end of the formal aspect of our webinar. So we are going to be moving on to questions and answers that we'll be taking from the chat section. And I will try to direct them to the panelists, our wonderful panelists, as relevantly as possible, but it's open to all of the panelists. So if you do have something to add, please feel free to join in at any moment. So starting with the first question that we have here is, how do we ensure that people in informal settlements receive civic education on how and where to report gender-based violence, especially in the case of where illegal immigrants might be afraid of approaching policemen, policewomen in police stations? So I think I'll direct that question to Auntie Beatrice, Mrs. Beatrice Akala, Dr. Beatrice Akala, sorry.
It's okay, Barbara. I'm Auntie Beatrice, all those. That is a very good question, because already the women in informal settlements face layers of marginalization. And just to think about, adding another layer of gender-based violence is quite heavy. And knowing that the system is not also very friendly, because they could maybe they don't have the right documents, the papers. So it makes it very hard for them to walk into a police station, as it has been rightfully noted, to go and report a question, an issue of abuse. So apart from going, and I talked about education even in the police stations, that sensitizing our police force to be able to say violence and abuse doesn't know any boundaries. So you could be legal, illegal, you could be a citizen, but you still face the same vice. So to start with, to say, can we sensitize our police stations, our police people, to be able to, listen and help, illegal immigrants who are facing violence, so that they don't suffer in silence. Because thing is, and also links up with the kind of impact, the violence would have on the person. At the end of the day, we share a humanity. We are all human beings, regardless of how we found ourselves in the spaces that we are in. And that's why I'm saying, although we have other interventions, local interventions, even within those communities, I'm sure, people get together and are able to support each other. But if we have a formalized way, and that's why I'm still going back to the legal structures, to the police station, to be able to say, let's give even illegal immigrants an opportunity, to be able to be heard and to be able, to be assisted whenever they walk in there. For me, that would be very good. Other interventions would be there maybe in the communities, and we just heard about women supporting other women, and maybe would have even churches and have community leaders within those environments. But I would be comfortable if even the illegal immigrants can walk into a police station and report and be able to find the necessary assistance that they need. Because we are saying again, it's not just being illegal, it's also about how the illegal immigrants, contribute to the economy of where they are. So they are working and contributing, and they are, they also, end up paying some taxes here and there that end up into building a nation. So they should be listened to, and their issues should be addressed through government structures. I know it's a bit hard, it's a gray area, but we should be able to make that space amiable for them to be able to walk through and be able to report whatever violence they're experiencing. So that would be my take on the issue.
Thank you very much. Assuming that there's no one who wants to add anything, please feel free to interject at any point. But
can I add something?
Thank you.
Sure. All right. Thanks, Barbara. Just to add, in addition to what Dr. Akala has mentioned, I think there's a role for the community to play in terms of educating people within the informal sector and providing channels through which we can provide support. And I think in a lot of informal settlements, the civil society has played a big role in that. So we've got women's shelters. In some settlements, you'll find the church plays a big role, the religious organizations, in setting up shelters for women where they can go in terms of reporting and so social protection. So there's a bigger role that I think the community can play and civil society. And I think most importantly also it's for the government to work with the structures and provide the necessary support for them. So for example, making the environment able. So if we've got shelters, they really need to be maybe protected, because sometimes also the government, I would say, is overwhelmed. Unfortunately, I'm not a civil servant, but I know that government is overwhelmed sometimes in terms of what they can do, not to absolve them, but I think there's a really way in which we can integrate the sort of support we get from civil society, from religious organizations and organized members of society to ensure that we are educated on our rights as individuals. We know that we can go there and find the necessary support that we need in terms of education. And whenever we have opportunities, like we've just heard from Imaan, social media plays a big role. These days, the penetration of the mobile phone is quite high. So I think it's incumbent on us to share that information wherever we can so that people can get to the next level. And also to mention that when we talk about gender-based violence, for me, it's not just perpetration of women. It's not really just the women, although they have the bigger burden. We also have men who suffer from gender-based violence. And you can imagine these days, if you've got a single father, for example, a household that is headed by a man and he's got young children, maybe he's widowed, how does that, what sort of violation does he form? Does he face within the community? What level of support does he get in ensuring that his children are not violated, he is not violated? And going back to what I think Jane shared earlier in terms of the childcare policies, does he get the same type of leave? Is it expected? Does the society provide that support for him, or do they let him suffer? Because you can imagine the expectations in society towards such people. So when we talk about gender-based violence, I think it's important to remember that although one gender has faced this a lot and carries the bigger burden, we also have pockets of other people that also similarly face. So I think there's a bigger role for wider community to also engage in this. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you very much. I see here amongst our participants, Mrs. Susan Dada has her hand raised. So I'm just going to allow her to perhaps share a little bit of her insight on that as well.
Okay, thank you, Barbara, and thanks to all the speakers that have contributed today. I hope you can hear me. I'm just somewhere paused in a basement, in a parking, but I think I just want to really thank you very much for the organization and bringing this topic that we could all participate and get to share what on the insights and actually taking it to the next level, as all the speakers have alluded to. One of the things listening to the different speakers that comes to mind is that we're looking at issues, gender, looking at issues around society and what we are doing and how it's impacting on us in different ways. But I think in this case, we're looking more at actually who's making the laws for us, who's doing the rules and regulations. So the issue of mainstreaming gender in our different levels and hierarchies in the government that we experience, wherever it may be, becomes a very crucial part in terms of tackling the project, because it all starts with allocation of resources. You find that gender does not receive actually the amount that is expected or required to just enable the different programs that we implement or the different aspects we need to work on. Because you'll find that in rural communities, for example, in one case we've had where we said, okay, we would like to go as far as we can into the communities. You find that access to, communication, gadgets and things like that has been very, very key in helping some of the people out there just to learn how to report, to learn how to come to party to say, this is what is happening to us. And for all this, we realized that it had to be a very heavy investment in trying to say, how do we help the women and the men out there? Because it's not only women, because that's the mistake we make when we look at gender. It's actually either way. What happens to that man who gets chased away by a wife in the middle of the night because he came home and could not provide, or he left with all the money and came back, looking in a state that was not appreciated? So you find things like that in some of the pictures we see where, there's a bit of overpowering from the either sex. So we're looking at it to say that we need to mainstream gender in our work and in our laws and in our programs. And we have to start it from the family level, because it's all the discussions we have where we start stereotyping right from an early age, where we say, I struggle a lot when I hear my little one saying, oh, but those are just girls. I'm like, what's wrong with the girls? So you have to bring it in to say there's no difference between girls and boys. It's just that how we access and get information and benefits from the different situations we find ourselves may be different, but at the end of the day, there's benefits for all. So that's just the message I would like to maybe share with the group today, to say, yes, we can do something about it, but it's all in realizing that we need to mainstream this aspect in all our areas of life and see to it that we send out a message that is of benefit to all parties and not to make the one party feel left out from the other. Thank you, Barbara and the team.
Thank you very much. I think that I do encourage everyone to just, if you have any more questions, post them in the chat. But just to acknowledge 2 points that have been made here is with regards to the issue of illegal immigrants and how they can approach the police station to report the issues of gender-based violence. One comment here is that there are other channels available when it comes to government to government, when it comes to kind of approaching it from a diplomatic channel. And so in doing that, preserving the identity of whoever has reported the issue. I think the main thing to consider there is just the accessibility and the education, allowing people to know that that is an option that they have when it comes to the avenues that they can use to report gender-based violence or any type of violence or injustice that they may be facing, because it is definitely sometimes, as we've seen in the past, a lot of hostility towards immigrants in a lot of different spaces. And so just still assuring them that these are your rights, you still have an option, you're still a human being, as Dr. Akala mentioned. And then the second point that was brought up is we've all, I think, seen in the media and the news the spike in domestic violence incidences during COVID-19, and just looking at how they have mainstreamed interventions towards this issue and towards addressing the issue of domestic violence during this time. Because I think with a lot of issues that we have within our society, they have been intensified by the presence of COVID-19. So Yes, I think because the people who asked these questions are actually here, who brought up these points are actually here. Perhaps I could ask if they are interested in sharing their perspective there. Deborah, would you be willing to just share a little bit on that point that you made in the chat?
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for this forum, for arranging for it. I think it's very important, especially during this time. And I think this, the issue of COVID and the impact of COVID on very many things have really been on my mind for a while. But of essence is the level of interventions that we are taking on COVID, and in a way, there's some kind of a skewed thinking around, oh, we have to deal with COVID, and then we forget that there are these other issues that have also been prevalent, especially in the continent, before even COVID. So then that makes it even worse, because then COVID escalates the issues that are at hand at that point. And so I was just wondering whether there are ways that government and different communities during in their intervention in the management of COVID can be able to mainstream mechanisms or interventions that could also tackle gender-based violence. Because then if we are only looking at the management of COVID, outside the changes in social interactions that COVID is bringing about, then we in a way lose the point and we backtrack.
Thank you very much, Deborah, for sharing that. And Mr. Rulos Makoha, if you are able to just give us a minute of insight to the point that you shared there. And in addition to that, I see we've also asked if there are ways to donate and help women, illegal immigrants, from our personal capacity. Mr. Rulos is available, yes.
Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes, now I wanted to say that I am thanking all of you for the organization of this webinar, and to just give an insight on what I have at least written to answer one of the questions I saw there. And I've seen also another one that, do you know of any ways for us to donate or provide help to women illegal immigrants in our personal capacity? I work at the Kenya High Commission here in Pretoria, representing our country. And we have programs where we sometimes visit Kenyans in different places, or other people that we feel they are vulnerable. And we normally do that. So there is a channel which can happen. It is all about having information, intelligence information on where those illegal immigrants are and what is affecting them. Once we receive that information, we don't sometimes publicize the information. We have Kenyans who are even in prison here and other places, and you would find that we underground engage them, know how they are faring on wherever they are. So even the illegal women immigrants, we do the same thing. We organize and go to different places, both here in South Africa, in Lesotho, and in Eswatini, because that is our role. The government has sent us to ensure that the Kenyan diaspora and our people are comfortable. So those are the things we do, but we don't really, sometimes when you look at our website, like now we had an event where we decided that there are Kenyans who require help during this COVID, the way you are mentioning. I've heard there's a lady who talked about that, and we are planning to do that. So these are things we plan and we do them. And we think that the issue of illegal immigrants is an issue that we can handle, but with the right information to the embassy. If the information reaches us, then we can be able to intervene at that level, because that is what we are expected to do. And we don't need to reveal the identity of the illegal immigrants, but we can, as somebody has said, in the personal capacity, when we talk of personal capacity, we can be able to organize ourselves through our High Commission, and we help these people. And maybe other people who are affected in those sectors. We also have other diplomatic channels, because we talk with the other embassies and high commissions. So if they come from the different countries, once we have the information, we are able to get in touch with the other diplomatic channels and be able to help such kind of people. That is what I can say as for now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makoha, for sharing that with us. I think that we do have, we are now short of time. So I think to conclude, I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining. And just to wrap up, I'd like to just to kind of wrap up on everything that we have discussed today, just in terms of the rights of women in the workplace, especially in the informal sector, and what gender-based violence is, just acknowledging and allowing ourselves to be educated that violence isn't just the typical emotional, physical, psychological abuse that we see every day, but the deprivation, the economic and educational deprivation that people also face is part of violence. And when their ability to contribute to society is kind of suppressed or hindered by even societal kind of structures and government structures, that those are also examples of violence that we see. And so it is a bigger, broader concept than what sometimes is publicized, and just acknowledging that is very important. And also just the importance of educating our children, because and not taking for granted the fact that children actually know more than we think they do. And in the society that we live in, I think that as much as we need to approach these issues sensitively, there is an urge to educate people on the impact of gender-based violence, the impact of violence, and the impact and the what exactly it is from a young age, to understand this space that I'm in is a space in which I'm being violated, and what can I do moving forward from there, without necessarily treating the issue sensitively, but still maintaining the urgency that lies within it. And then just looking at the reasons why women are kind of suffering more when it comes to contributing to the labor force, and especially in the informal economy, why it's such a topical issue, and just acknowledging kind of what I think I sometimes called like the secret side of it, that I think not necessarily because we don't know, but it's been so socialized. Unpaid care work has been so socialized within our community that we don't even have a name for it, just to justify how come women are not able to contribute at the same level as men in society. And just, I think even if we were able to educate women on the whole concept of unpaid care work, it's like being able to put a name to something that so many of us experience every day, and this has been so socialized we don't even know that it happens. And having that education within our communities, not just like having governments understand what it is, but within our households, understanding that this role is not only for the woman in the house, or not only for the caretaker in the house, but that we can actually distribute these roles and allow everybody to have the fair chance to contribute to society optimally in whatever sphere they choose to do so. And just also the importance of social media and the importance of conversation and empowering people with that voice. I think that something that has been happening now, my first experience was definitely in 2019 when gender-based violence really had a front and a lot more protests were going on. The importance of conversation, because not only is it spreading awareness on an issue, but it also serves as a form of almost like a coping mechanism, a way to deal with trauma, which is really important. And so being able to discuss these issues, being able to conceptualize and verbalize, the experiences that we have, and understanding that we are not alone, and that we actually, there are many people who can relate to this, and there are many people who want to make a difference, and how we can make a difference. Those things are very important when it comes to conversations. So we should never stop talking about the issues that we are facing. And so in that regard, I'm so grateful to all of you who have been able to join us for this webinar, and also to our wonderful panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules on a Saturday afternoon to discuss these pressing issues, and really just enlightening us with their invaluable time and their experiences, which we can all learn from, because they've spent years, going through and learning and educating others on these issues. So it's a real honor for us that you've been able to take time out of your day to speak to us, and also just appreciating everybody who has, contributed their ideas, their thoughts, their questions. And I hope that everybody was able to take something home from this. Kayla, if you'd like to add something as well.
Barbara, I just want to thank you for organizing this event. Like, it wouldn't be possible without you, so you should also give yourself credit. I think we had it was a very heavy conversation, but very progressive and very necessary. I think we need to have more conversations like this. And also, I felt very privileged to have conversations with really, really educated people, and people, like, it felt like I could do something to make a difference, because I'm receiving advice from very, very, very credible, educated people. So I think that it's definitely a way forward. So thank you so much for hosting this, Barbara, and to everybody who joined, all the speakers. And yeah, I'm just very grateful for this webinar. Thank you.
Yes, and also I'd just like to thank Mrs. Loice Alusala, because she definitely helped me in terms of reaching out to the wonderful panelists that we had today and putting this whole webinar together. So I will, there is a recording of this, and while you're all here on the platform, I am working with, unfortunately, Hanān and Jeppie had to leave us a bit earlier in the webinar, but this video, it's been recorded, so we will publicize it, but also excerpts from this video we are working on. We're currently producing, the three of us, Hanān, Kayla, and I are producing a video on the 16 days of activism that we'll have in probably the next week, will be out on my YouTube channel, Barbara Vlogs, and excerpts from this webinar will also be there. So if you missed out, or if you would like to, if there's someone who missed this webinar that you would have loved to just get some key points and information, then you can definitely catch that all there. And I think that is where I am concluding. I don't have anything else to add. So thank you everybody for your time. And hopefully, I think we might make this an annual event, just to talk about 16 days of activism, because we do have this every year. So I look forward to seeing you all again next year. And hopefully some of you will also make your own platforms and have these conversations. So thank you all for joining us. And thank you to my host as well. Thank you, Kayla and Hanān in her absence for taking the time and working so hard to make this possible. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Barbara, for having us. It's a great pleasure to participate.